The Home Alone series needs no introduction. Written and produced by John Hughes, who was behind many classics of the 80s and 90s, including The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Directed by Chris Columbus, who was also behind the first two Harry Potter movies. With a score written by John Williams, aka the guy who wrote the Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Superman themes, and with the main character, Kevin, being played by one of the most iconic child actors of all time, Macaulay Culkin. Holy shit. The first two Home Alone movies aren't exactly things you'll see topping people's best movies of all time lists, but there's a reason that everyone and their grandma knows them. I say the first two, though. People tend to have varying degrees of knowledge of the existence of 3 and beyond, but they don't really seem to be considered classics in the same way. Well, I'm about to go through the whole series, so maybe we're gonna find out why. The original Home Alone from 1990 is alright. Obviously, the score is fantastic. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern are amazingly cast and have a lot of great memorable lines in both this one and the sequel.
Marv!
Harry?
Why the hell did you take your shoes off?
Why the hell you dressed like a chicken?
And while the technical filmmaking isn't mind-blowing, it's pretty decent. I'd say my biggest problem with the original movie is that I find it pretty inconsistent. Some of the jokes are really funny, while others really aren't, and I also find some of the slapstick to be a bit too wince-worthy. This extends to the emotional elements of the movie as well. I think the ending scene is kinda nice on its own, but overall feels a little unearned because I definitely think the conflict at the beginning of the movie could have been handled a bit better. So overall, it's not amazing, it's definitely flawed, but it's decent. Home Alone 2 is a direct sequel that came out in 1992, and it's an unusual case for me as far as sequels go. On one hand, it's a complete carbon copy of the first one. It's the same plot about the same kid winding up in the same scenario of getting separated from his family at Christmas after having pretty much the same argument with them, and then the same two robbers from the first movie show up with the same plan to take advantage of the Christmas season to strike it rich, so the kid has to deal with the robbers in the exact same way. And there are a bunch of gags and side plots that are pretty much recycled from the first movie. On the other hand, I've always liked this one better. I find it a lot more consistently funny. I think the conflict between Kevin and his family is better handled, and this one has Tim Curry. My only real problem with this one in particular is that I think some of the traps during the break-in scene bend reality a bit too much. Like, obviously none of the traps in any of the movies are realistic, but you can only push it so far before I'm no longer able to buy what's happening in-universe. Like this part, for example. This always bothered me even as a kid. Marv is propelled forward by absolutely nothing, so it just looks like someone grabs his feet and pulls him out of frame. And honestly, that skeleton moment would seem weird and out of place, even in the later sequels. So, once again, not a masterpiece, but decent and my preferred choice out of the original two. Home Alone 3 came out in 1997, still written and produced by John Hughes, but now directed by Roger Gosnell, the editor of the first two movies, whose directorial resume also includes Big Mama's House, the live-action Scooby-Doo and Smurf movies, as well as Show Dogs. Yeah. The movie has none of the original cast, so rather than recasting the original characters, they instead opted for an anthological approach to the series. This one is about a new kid named Alex, played by a kid named Alex, and instead of being about the kid going up against a pair of burglars after accidentally getting separated from his family, it's about the kid realizing a group of terrorists working for North Korea have begun hiding out in his neighborhood after a missile chip that they were trying to steal accidentally winds up in his possession, and taking matters into his own hands when no one will believe him. I guess they wanted the stakes on this one to be a bit higher. Both critically and financially, this one was a massive step down from the first two. Probably the primary reason that this was the last movie in the series to be released in theaters. Pretty much every single element had a dip in quality. In the original two movies, the interactions between the family members mostly felt pretty organic, while in this one, all of their interactions feel a lot more forced.
Alex, could you pass me the false alarms? Excuse me, I'm sorry. I meant the peas.
Ho, ho.
The iconic John Williams score only appears in the opening credits, with the rest of the score being so bland that I barely even noticed it, but things don't get particularly terrible until the climactic break-in scene. In the first two movies, you could say that some of the traps were really contrived and only worked because things went in a very specific way, and that would be a valid criticism. But that's every trap in the third one, to a much greater degree. Like, what, the kid predicted that this guy would decide to sit down in a random-ass chair he sees on the way to the door? Not to mention, these actors are terrible at reactions. About 90% of the time, their reaction merely consists of making a silly face, and whenever it doesn't, ugh. No joke, the woman's reaction to falling for a trap that causes a china pot to fall on her face is just... Even ignoring all of that, the whole scene is very technically incompetent as well. It has a massive over-reliance on terrible cartoony sound effects, a lot of it shot in a way that looks like they're trying to minimize the amount of stunt work they have to do, and some sequences are so poorly communicated that I genuinely can't figure out what is even supposed to be happening in them. If I had to say any semi-positive thing about this one, I guess the child performances weren't that bad. That's one major thing that I was expecting to immediately plummet in quality after the first two movies, and while they're not great, and there are certainly some really clunky line deliveries, believe me, they're Oscar level compared with what's to come. Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House, is a 2002 TV movie, and I guess they changed their mind about taking the series in an anthological direction because this one features many of the original characters. Recast, of course, so I guess Kevin has brown hair now, and that's supposed to be Marv. And it returns to the canon of the first two movies, kind of. They constantly make references to the events of the first two movies.
I'll stay home alone.
No.
I've done it before.
Don't remind me.
But the child actors are all younger than their equivalents were even in the first movie, and wasn't Kevin one of 5 kids in the original movies? Where did the other 2 go? Even ignoring its total butchering of the continuity, Home Alone 4 is easily the worst movie in the franchise. It is insufferable. The plot is basically recycled from the third one, except with Kevin instead of the new kid, and it takes just about every single problem that anyone could possibly have with the first 3 movies and makes them all about 60 million times more annoying. Kevin is an unlikable moron, the performances are on the same level as one of those fake movies within an actual movie, the music sounds like stock music except somehow even more cheap and generic, the family are bullies straight out of a cartoon show. It's so on the nose that there are scenes where they have casual conversations behind Kevin's back about how much they enjoy tormenting him.
Kevin always puts on the star.
That's right, he does, doesn't he?
I always hold him up. And then I give him a wedgie.
He makes a fuss, we all laugh.
Which makes scenes where they take the same sentiment that they do in the first movie feel especially stupid, and it's genuinely impossible to explain how dumb the trap sequences and certain plot points are because doing so would require me to understand the thought process of characters that it's physically impossible to be as stupid as.
Open sesame.
Well, get a load of that. Open bar. Open bookshelf. Open book bar. Open book bar shelf. Open book bar thing.
Thankfully, it's completely self-contained, and this was the last direct sequel, so it's super easy for fans to just consider it non-canon and never think about it again. Home Alone 5, The Holiday Heist, is another TV movie, this one coming out in 2012, and is the first movie in the series that I actually hadn't seen prior to making this review. In fact, I hadn't even heard of it until a year or 2 ago. And no wonder why, it's basically irrelevant. It didn't have the budget and theatrical release that the third one had, and it didn't have the connection to the first two that the fourth one had. I guess once again they changed their mind and decided to go back to making it an anthology series, and honestly that may be the only reason I don't find this one even more insufferable than the fourth one. On a more objective level, nearly every element of this one is either just as bad or somehow even worse, but the fourth one's butchering of existing characters was personally far more painful to sit through. That's not to say that this one wasn't also painful, though. Like, for example, let's take a look at how characters are written in this one. Every character is assigned something like video games, or snow, or their ex-lover Steve, and no joke, every single line of dialogue that comes from that character is about that. It might sound like I have to be exaggerating, but I'm really not.
You know, build snowman, make snowballs. We could make snow cones. Wanna help me finish my snow fort? More snow! I see that. Wanna make snowballs with me? No snow, snowballs.
The only exceptions are that every once in a while a character will remind us that everyone believes the house is haunted. And by every once in a while, I mean about twice every scene. It's equally grating. If there were any actual positives this one had over the fourth one, I guess it would be that the break-in scene is closer in quality to the one in the third movie. Yeah, the worst part of the third movie is about on par with the best part of this movie. That's how much they drop in quality. Finally, what the hell is this one called? Home Sweet Home Alone. Nice grammar. But yeah, apparently there's a sixth one, and as of me uploading this, it came out on Disney Plus less than 2 months ago. This one takes a slightly different approach to the series by making the kid the antagonist. Kind of. Also, the kid is British. Yeah, British people in American media. That's a great combination.
You know, the world could always use more heroes.
Essentially, the plot is that this couple are about to lose their house because they can't afford it, but then find out that they're in possession of an incredibly rare and valuable doll. And for reasons that are kinda stupid, but not nearly as stupid as anything that happens in the fourth or fifth movies, the couple thinks that the kid stole it, so they try to steal it back and the whole Home Alone shtick happens. It's set in the same universe as the original movies, however, it's only connected by a cameo and a few Easter eggs, for lack of a better word. I wouldn't mind them doing this if they didn't feel the need to absolutely shove the reference in the audience's face to make sure that they're noticed. The best example is when Buzz from the original movie shows up as a police officer, and there's a close-up shot dedicated to showing his name tag. This means absolutely nothing to the characters in the movie, that shot is only there for the audience, and stuff like this happens very frequently. Not quite as frequently as Ghostbusters Afterlife, but still pretty frequently. They try to make a meta comment about it at one point when a sci-fi remake of Angels with Filthy Souls is playing on TV, and a character comments on how remakes always suck, but saying something sucks and then continuing to do it anyway isn't exactly a very substantive comment. I suppose I should also mention that this one actually does use music from the original movie. It's incredibly cheap, but honestly I'd take it over the stock trash they used in 4 and 5. Other than that, it's basically the same deal as those two, except not quite as bad. Similar but slightly higher tier TV movie production value, slightly less irritating attempts at comedic acting and writing, and another break-in sequence similar in overall quality to the one in the third movie. The only unique issue with this one is this series of bizarre imagination sequences that feel a lot more like they're trying to reference A Christmas Story than Home Alone. Overall, Home Sweet Home Alone is really bad, but not quite painful like the last two were. So to wrap this up, here's my ranking for the series. I think the best one is Home Alone 2, followed by the original, then 3, then Home Sweet Home, then The Holiday Heist, and last and least is Taking Back the House. I wonder if they're going to continue making these. I get the want to keep making more movies in a previously successful franchise, but with this one they've tried direct sequels, hard reboots, and soft reboots. But for some reason with this particular franchise, it seems like every time they try, people collectively decide they don't want it.